The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, its surface a rippling expanse of ink-black waves beneath the heavy shroud of night. The Horizon Dawn, a state-of-the-art deep-sea research vessel, cut through the darkness, its floodlights carving pale beams through the mist that curled low over the water. The hum of its engines was the only sound, aside from the occasional rustling of water against the hull. Captain Jason Ward stood at the bridge, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the screens displaying sonar readings. 43 years old, hardened by years of military service before turning to civilian exploration, he had seen his share of strange things in the deep. But nothing quite like this. "Run it again," he said. Dr. Hannah Reyes, the ship's lead oceanographer, adjusted her glasses and tapped at her console. The distress signal had come in 7 hours ago, an old-fashioned, analog transmission, heavily degraded, repeating every 90 seconds. No coordinates, no identification, just a scrambled message wrapped in bursts of static. And yet, against all logic, their systems had traced its source. "There," Reyes muttered, isolating a fragment of the audio. A garbled voice rasped through the speakers, distorted but unmistakably human. "We never meant to return." The bridge went silent. "Christ," whispered Morales, the ship's engineer, rubbing the back of his neck. Ward exhaled sharply. "Still no record of any vessel lost in this region?" "None," Reyes said. "Not in the last 100 years. And yet," Morales added, leaning closer to the sonar, "we got something big sitting exactly where this signal originates." A shape loomed in the darkness, a massive structure partially submerged in the ocean's embrace. It hadn't appeared on satellite scans before today, as if it had simply materialized out of nowhere. The sonar readout suggested something impossibly large, 300 meters at least, rivaling the great warships of the past. But the design was wrong. The angles, the proportions, none of it matched any known class of naval architecture. Ward adjusted his earpiece. "Drake, what's our distance?" The voice of his first officer crackled over the comm, 1,000 meters and closing. No response to our hails. "Keep us steady." As the Horizon Dawn neared, the mist thickened. The sea took on an unnatural stillness, waves slapping gently against the hull instead of churning in restless motion. The smell of salt was tinged with something else, something old, metallic, almost like rusted iron. Then the ship came into view. It was a battleship, no doubt about that. Its hull, once sleek and mighty, was now encrusted with barnacles and black algae. The steel corroded as if it had been submerged for centuries. Towering above the waterline, its turrets were silent, empty sockets where massive guns had once been mounted. The entire structure bore the weight of time. Yet, inexplicably, it was intact. The nameplate, barely visible beneath layers of grime, bore a single word in faded white letters. "NSS Abyssus." Morales let out a slow breath. "Never heard of it." "Neither has the world," Reyes muttered. Ward turned away from the window. "Suit up. We're going aboard." The boarding skiff bobbed slightly as it approached the derelict. Spotlights cut across the hull, illuminating jagged gashes in the metal, as if the ship had been caught in battle with something far greater than itself. The rusted gangway was intact, though covered in thick, rope-like strands of kelp that slithered in the wind. Ward led the team, Morales, Reyes, and 2 security officers, up the gangway, boots clanking against the corroded metal. Every step felt like an intrusion. The air changed the moment they crossed onto the deck. The temperature dropped noticeably, an oppressive cold that dug beneath their suits. The silence was absolute, not the natural quiet of an abandoned place, but a hollow absence, as if sound itself had been swallowed. Reyes ran a gloved hand over a nearby bulkhead. "The metal's warm." Morales frowned. "That's not possible. Feel for yourself." He hesitated, then pressed his palm against the hull. His brow furrowed. It wasn't just warm. It was humming, a faint vibration that pulsed beneath the surface like the echo of a heartbeat. "Let's move," Ward ordered. They made their way toward the bridge, weaving through narrow corridors slick with condensation. The walls bore strange markings, symbols scratched into the steel, almost like a language, but none they could recognize. "Drake, do you read?" Ward tried the comms. "Static." Reyes adjusted her equipment. "We're getting interference. Something's jamming us." Morales muttered a curse under his breath. "I don't like this." Neither did Ward. The door to the bridge hung slightly open. He stepped forward, pushing it wider, his flashlight beam cutting through the stale air. The control panels were still intact, coated in dust but eerily pristine, as if no decay had touched them. The screens were dark, the ship's systems long dead. And yet, the pilot's chair was occupied. Ward's breath hitched. The figure was seated upright, clad in an old naval officer's uniform, the insignia unrecognizable. His skin was taut, mummified by time, his empty eye sockets staring eternally into the void. A dry rasp filled the air. The corpse turned its head. Reyes gasped, stumbling backward. The thing's jaw moved, bones creaking. And then, in a voice that should not have been possible, it spoke, not from its lips, but from the speakers of the dead console. "You shouldn't be here." A shriek of static cut through the bridge, the lights flickering as if the ship itself had just awoken. Then came a sound, a deep, resonant groan reverberating through the hull. Not mechanical, organic. Something else was aboard, and it had just noticed them. Ward's instincts screamed at him to move. He grabbed Reyes by the arm, pulling her toward the exit. "Out, now!" The static in their earpieces flared, a broken transmission crackling through the interference. "You let it out." Morales slammed the bridge door shut behind them. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," Ward said, forcing down the surge of adrenaline. "But we're leaving." They retraced their steps, boots pounding against the metal. The ship felt different now, the corridors somehow longer, stretching where they had not before. The markings on the walls, those strange symbols, were changing, shifting like ink bleeding across a page. Then the lights flickered out. A breathless moment of darkness. Then footsteps. Not theirs. Something ahead. The emergency light flickered back on, bathing the corridor in crimson. A silhouette stood at the far end. Tall. Wrong. A mockery of a human form, stretched too thin, its joints moving at angles that defied biology. It stood still, watching. Then it moved. Not a walk. A jerk forward by several feet. Then again, and again, closing the distance too fast. Reyes screamed. "Run!" Ward bellowed. They sprinted, adrenaline surging. The sound behind them grew, a rasping scrape against metal, an impossible gasping breath that was not theirs. The exit was close. 10 meters. 5. Then the ship lurched. A force yanked them backward, an invisible pull like the gravity of a collapsing star. The gangway collapsed into the ocean. Their only escape route was gone, and the thing in the corridor took another step. The ship groaned beneath their feet, a deep, reverberating sound that felt less like shifting metal and more like the exhalation of something alive. The red emergency lights pulsed, casting jagged shadows along the walls as Ward turned, drawing his sidearm. Reyes was breathing heavily beside him, eyes wide with panic, while Morales cursed under his breath. The thing in the corridor had stopped moving. It stood just at the edge of the flickering light, its elongated body still, yet radiating an unnatural presence. Its head was cocked in an unnatural angle, like it was listening. Then it moved, not with the slow deliberation of a living being, but in sudden, jerking bursts, closing distance in a way that made Ward's stomach lurch. A flicker, then 3 meters closer. Another pulse of red light, now only feet away. "Move!" Ward barked. They scrambled into the adjacent passageway, booted feet slamming against metal. A distant sound echoed behind them, a wet, dragging noise that made Ward's skin crawl. He didn't stop to look. The corridor twisted in unnatural ways. The more they ran, the less sense the ship's layout made. The paths they had taken before now looped in ways that should have been impossible. Metal groaned in protest, and the lights flickered, revealing brief glimpses of things moving in the walls. Not creatures, but shadows that didn't belong. Where the hell is the exit? Morales shouted, his breath ragged. Ward turned a sharp corner, heart pounding. The gangway was gone. The sea had swallowed it whole. Shit, he muttered. Reyes braced against the bulkhead, hands trembling. We're trapped. No, Ward said, forcing himself to stay calm. Panic would get them killed. We get to the lower decks. There's another exit in the launch bay. Morales swallowed. You sure about that? No, Ward admitted, but he was out of better options. Behind them, the passage darkened. A low, rattling breath filled the air. It was close. He didn't hesitate. Go. Now. They moved quickly, descending a rusted stairwell slick with condensation. The ship hummed, vibrating under their boots. They weren't alone. The lower decks were wrong. The corridors stretched too long, the doors too tall, as if the ship had been remade by something that didn't quite understand human proportions. Some of the bulkheads bore etchings, deep grooves that weren't rust or wear, but something deliberate. The symbols spiraled in erratic patterns, shifting when looked at directly. Reyes shuddered. Those weren't there before. I don't think the ship was here before, Morales murmured. Ward didn't respond. His grip on his weapon tightened. They moved forward cautiously. The air was thick, humid, breathing as if the very walls exhaled. Then they found the first body. It was collapsed against the wall, wearing a tattered naval officer's uniform. Mummified, the patches on the sleeves were faded, but the insignia was nothing they recognized. The figure was seated as if resting, but its hands were clasped over its face, as if shielding its eyes from something it had seen before it died. Morales took a step back. I don't like this. Ward knelt down, examining the uniform. The material was off, not quite right. When he touched it, the fabric rippled, shifting as if refusing to be properly perceived. This isn't just a derelict, he muttered. It's something else. Reyes checked the figure's chest. No signs of struggle. No wounds. He just stopped. A sound, not movement. A whisper. You let it out. Ward's head snapped up. Did you hear that? Reyes swallowed. It sounded like the voice from the bridge. They backed away, leaving the figure undisturbed. As they did, the ship shifted, the metal groaning, and the passage ahead elongated. A corridor that should have been 20 meters long now stretched into darkness. Then the lights flickered, and the body stood up. They ran. The sound behind them was wrong, a scraping, stuttering lurch like a puppet cut from its strings. The corridor twisted in impossible ways, narrowing and stretching, the ship's geometry unraveling into madness. Ward's breathing was controlled, but inside, every survival instinct screamed. He turned a corner and stopped dead. A massive door loomed before them. Unlike the rest of the ship, this metal was pristine. Uniged, it bore no rust, nowhere, only a single pulsing line running through the center, glowing faintly blue. This, Reyes whispered. This doesn't belong here. Morales swore. Nothing belongs here. Ward approached, reaching out cautiously. His fingers grazed the surface. The metal was warm, and something thumped from the other side. Reyes gasped. Something's in there. Another thump. Louder. Then, a distorted voice crackling through unseen speakers. Help us. It was multiple voices at once, overlapping, layered, some too deep, others too thin. Open the door. Morales stepped back. We are not opening that door. Reyes hesitated, her scientist's curiosity battling her fear. If someone is in there. They aren't, Ward said firmly. The whispers returned. They didn't come from the door. They came from behind them. They turned slowly. The thing that had followed them was not alone anymore. Figures stood in the dim light, half-formed, their features shifting like oil on water. Some wore naval uniforms from different eras. Others were featureless shapes of pure shadow, their limbs too long, their heads twitching at unnatural angles. And they were watching. Morales reached for his weapon. Ward stopped him with a glance. Don't, Ward said quietly. Just stay still. The figures didn't move. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Then from somewhere deep in the ship, the emergency sirens blared. A mechanical voice, one they hadn't heard before, echoed through the halls. Containment breach detected. The shadows began to move. and the door behind them clicked open. A gust of freezing air rushed out, carrying whispers, half-formed figures spilling into reality. Reyes screamed. Then the ship lurched violently, and the floor beneath them collapsed. Darkness swallowed them. For a moment, Ward couldn't tell if he was conscious or dreaming. He hit the ground hard, pain lancing through his shoulder. They had fallen. His ears rang, his vision swam, but the first thing he noticed was the absence of light. Wherever they were, it was deep within the ship, a cavernous chamber untouched by time. A groan echoed from above. "Morales?" he called. A pained grunt answered. "Still here." Reyes coughed. That was not supposed to happen. Ward forced himself up. His flashlight flickered, barely illuminating their surroundings. And that was when he saw it. The engine. But it was nothing like any reactor he had ever seen. It was massive, a twisting, spiraling thing, half metal, half something else, its surface rippling like liquid metal and breathing. Lines of alien script ran across its surface, shifting as if trying to be understood. Then a hand pressed against the inside. Not a human hand. Something thin, something wrong. And the whispers returned. Ward stepped back. Then the hand pushed through the metal, and something began to crawl out. Ward's instincts screamed at him to run, but his body refused to obey. He was rooted in place, his gaze locked onto the impossible sight before him. The hand pressing through the metal wasn't flesh, not entirely. It shifted between states, a sickening interplay of bone, shadow, and something metallic, like an unfinished thought trying to manifest. Fingers twitched, elongated joints cracking, as the thing forced its way through the surface of the humming engine. A deep, resonant pulse filled the chamber. Not a sound, a presence. Reyes sucked in a sharp breath. That's not possible. Morales took a step back, shaking his head. Nope, this is where we leave. But there was nowhere to go. The chamber was a vast, circular space lined with unfamiliar consoles, their controls pulsing dimly, as if the entire room were a single living organism. No doors, no stairwell back up, just the engine and the thing emerging from it. Ward forced his muscles to move, raising his sidearm. A useless gesture, he knew, but survival instincts overrode logic. The figure pulled itself free. It was tall, unnaturally so, its body flickering between states of matter, half real, half undefined. Where its face should have been, there was only a shifting absence, a void where light seemed to collapse inward. Its limbs were thin, too long, yet not fragile, the way a wire under tension is not fragile. It tilted its head, as if observing them, and then, in a voice that did not come from its form, but from the air itself, it spoke. "We remember you." The words slammed into Ward's skull like a migraine. A flash of not memories flickered through his mind. Visions of things he had never seen, battles he had never fought, ships like the NSS Abyssus drifting through empty space, their crews screaming. Ward gritted his teeth. What are you?" The figure twitched, its head rotating too far, too fast. The shifting patterns of its body writhed. "You were not meant to return." Morales aimed his weapon. "Step back." The figure did not move, but something behind them did. A whisper of motion, a subtle, insidious shift in the air pressure. Ward turned sharply, and his stomach dropped. The walls were watching, not with eyes, but with awareness. Shapes pressed against the metal, human silhouettes trapped just beneath the surface, their forms distorted, blurred, as if they had been fused into the structure itself. Some were still, others moved. Hands clawed at the surface. Silent mouths screamed without sound. Reyes stumbled backward, horror twisting her expression. They're alive. No, Ward thought. Not alive. Not dead, either. The ship was eating them. The engine thrummed again. The air shimmered, and the figure stepped closer. "The rift must remain closed," it said. Reyes was trembling now, but she forced words through her fear. "The rift? The engine is a gateway." The thing regarded her in silence. Morales, still aiming, swallowed hard. "We need to get the hell out of here." Ward's mind raced. The ship, the strange geometry, the disappearances, It all pointed to the same impossible conclusion. The NSS Abyssus had never been a ship. It was a door, a bridge between their reality and something else. And now, that door was open. The whispering from the walls intensified. Ward's grip tightened on his weapon. How do we close it? The figure tilted its head again, its form shifting erratically. Then it raised one elongated hand and pointed at Ward. One must remain. The words hung in the air like a guillotine. Reyes paled. What does that mean? The figure's answer was simple. The ship must be sealed. The rift must be contained. Morales' breath came hard and fast. Oh, hell no. No. You want us to just leave someone here? Silence. But it wasn't really silence. The walls were still moving. The whispers had shifted into something else. A chorus of voices, hundreds, maybe thousands, all speaking at once. Some pleading, some screaming, some laughing. Ward looked at the engine, at the shadows pressing through its metal skin. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't offering them a deal. It was stating a fact. One of them had to stay. The alternative? The ship would remain open. And whatever was on the other side of that rift, it would keep coming. Ward clenched his jaw. There has to be another way. The figure did not move. The whispering grew louder. Then something else crawled through the rift. Not humanoid, not even vaguely so. A mass of tendrils shifting in and out of perception, its form folding and unfolding in ways that hurt the brain to process. It wasn't moving toward them. It was simply expanding, growing. Reyes made a strangled noise. It's not stopping. It wasn't. Because it wasn't one entity. It was many, and it was escaping. Morales fired. The shot rang out in the chamber, useless. The bullet vanished before it ever reached the figure. The whispering changed. Now it was inside their heads. Ward grabbed Reyes's arm, forcing her attention. The reactor. Can we overload it? She blinked, mind scrambling. I don't know. It's not a normal system. But if I can trigger an energy surge through whatever's powering the rift, then do it. The walls convulsed. Figures pushed through, humanoid shapes with no features, their limbs dripping shadow like liquid, stretching toward them. Morales cursed, backing away. Fast, Reyes. She was already moving, fingers dancing over the alien controls, deciphering what should have been impossible. Ward turned to Morales. Be ready to run. Morales gave him a look. What about? The air split. A sound ripped through the chamber. An unearthly howl. Something that wasn't made of vocal cords, but of pure, distorted reality. The mass in the rift lunged. And then, the ship screamed. Every light burst. The walls shook. A surge of energy tore through the chamber, and the creature's form recoiled. Not in pain, but in recognition. It knew what was happening. The gateway was collapsing. Reyes shouted, "We have 15 seconds before this place goes with it." Ward grabbed her, Morales covering their flank as the shadows shrieked in protest. The figure, the first one, the one that spoke, stood motionless, watching them run. Then it stepped back into the rift. It was choosing to stay. Just before the darkness swallowed it, Ward heard its final words. "Remember us." The chamber imploded. Ward hit the ground hard. His lungs burned, his ears ringing. The Horizon Dawn's deck was beneath him. The ship was gone. Nothing remained. No wreckage. No impossible geometry. Just ocean. Reyes coughed violently beside him. Morales lay on his back, breathing hard. Ward's hand trembled. The memory of that whispering chorus still echoed in his skull. The abyssus had been erased. But as Ward sat up, staring into the endless black waves, he felt it. A hollow emptiness. Like something had been left unfinished. Or worse, like something was still watching. Then the distress beacon crackled back to life. A new signal. Reyes paled. Oh no. Ward exhaled, the realization sinking in. The NSS Abyssus was gone. But the rift was never just in one place. Somewhere out there, it was starting again. The distress beacon's signal pulsed like a dying heartbeat, cutting through the static of the ship's radio. Ward sat motionless on the deck of the Horizon Dawn, his body aching, his mind still trapped somewhere between reality and the abyss. The ocean stretched empty before them. No trace of the NSS Abyssus, no wreckage, not even a ripple to suggest it had ever existed. But he knew better. Beside him, Reyes was hunched over the comms console, fingers white-knuckled around the controls. The screen flickered erratically, displaying coordinates that shouldn't exist, a patch of open ocean, far from any shipping routes, yet marked with the same eerie pulse they had followed to the abyssus. Reyes' voice was hoarse. "It's the same signal." Morales pushed himself up, still gasping for breath. His uniform was damp with sweat, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. "That's not possible. We shut it down. We watched that thing collapse." Ward stared at the console. The numbers flickered, momentarily distorting before settling into clarity. The signal was moving, drifting west, like something had been dislodged and was searching for a new anchor. "It wasn't just the ship," Ward said, his voice quiet. "The rift was never inside the abyssus." His jaw tightened. It was always something bigger. Morales exhaled sharply. "So what, it's still out there? That ship was just one what? A fragment? A doorway?" Ward didn't answer. The truth sat heavy in his chest. The abyssus hadn't been an isolated anomaly. It had been a symptom, a wound in reality that had momentarily bled through before being sealed. And now, it was leaking somewhere else. Reyes swallowed hard, pressing a hand to her forehead. "We need to tell someone. The Navy, the UN, hell, even private defense contractors. Someone has to know what we found." Ward shook his head. "You think they'll believe us?" Reyes hesitated. Morales gave a hollow laugh. "They'll cover it up before we finish the report. And even if they don't, what exactly do we tell them? We found a ghost ship that wasn't really a ship, almost got eaten by something that doesn't obey physics, then barely escaped before it phased out of existence again. You think they'll listen?" Reyes bit her lip. "They have to." But Ward knew better. Governments didn't deal in mysteries. They dealt in control. And whatever the abyssus had been, it had never belonged in human hands. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. His body still fell off, like something unseen was pressing just beneath his skin. His reflection in the monitor looked distorted, his eyes a fraction darker than he remembered. "Either way," he said finally, "we're not done with this." The Horizon Dawn made its way back to port under a heavy silence. No one spoke of what they had seen. No one wanted to. The world outside continued as if nothing had changed, because to everyone else, it hadn't. The news was filled with the usual distractions: political disputes, economic shifts, the occasional deep-sea discovery. There was no mention of a warship vanishing from history. No headlines about a distress signal from nowhere. And yet, Ward felt it. A pressure in the air, a subtle shift in the world's weight. Like something unseen had been set into motion. At night, he dreamed of the ship, not as it had been when they found it, but before, when it had still been crewed. He saw men in uniforms that didn't belong to any known navy, their faces blurred, their voices muffled as they scrambled at controls he didn't recognize. He saw their last moments, the moment the rift had opened, and the moment they had ceased to be human. He woke gasping, his sheets soaked with sweat. The whispers had followed him back. It started small. Electronics glitched in ways that defied explanation. Devices powered on when unplugged, lights flickered in deliberate patterns. His watch stopped at 3:33 a.m. every night. The mirrors were worse. At first, it was subtle. A delay in movement, a flicker of something standing behind him just as he turned away. But then the distortions became deliberate. One night, as he washed his face, he glanced up, and his reflection didn't move. It just stared. He backed away from the sink, heart hammering. The reflection raised a hand and waved. Then the mirror shattered. Reyes experienced it differently. She began losing time, minutes then hours. She would wake up in places she had no memory of going. Once, she found herself standing at the edge of a dock, staring at the black water, barefoot, phone left behind in her apartment. It took her a full minute to remember her own name. She called Ward in the middle of the night, her voice shaking. "I think we brought something back with us." He didn't answer right away. He had already come to the same conclusion. "You're not wrong," he admitted. Silence stretched over the line. Then she whispered, "It's still moving." Ward ran a hand down his face. "The signal, Not just that, she said. I think it's looking for something. His gut twisted. He already knew the answer. Looking for what? There was a pause. Then, so softly it barely registered. A new door. They met in a secure location a week later. The research data had been wiped. Every log entry, every transmission erased. Official reports listed their mission as routine deep-sea survey. No significant discoveries. There was no record of the abyssus. Someone had buried it. Someone knew. Ward exhaled, his hands tightening into fists. This isn't over. Reyes nodded, her expression grim. We have to stop it before it starts again. Morales leaned back, shaking his head. How? We barely survived last time. We don't even know what the hell we're fighting. We know enough, Ward said. The room was silent. Then Reyes pulled out a tablet, tapping the screen. She turned it to them. A satellite image. A ship-shaped shadow moving beneath the waves, hundreds of miles from where the abyssus had disappeared. Morales paled. Tell me that's a mistake. Reyes didn't blink. It's not. Ward's jaw tightened. Where's it heading? Reyes zoomed in. The coordinates resolved. The blood drained from Ward's face. It wasn't heading for another remote ocean trench. It was moving toward land. The rift hadn't just relocated. It was spreading. And this time, humanity was in its path. Somewhere in the dark, a new distress beacon began to transmit. A new signal. A new anomaly. And this time, it wasn't waiting to be found. It was coming to them.